During reign of Tsar Nicholas, the Russian Empire had an economy mostly based on farming, with many people working as peasants. The country tried to become more industrial like other European nations, but it was slow, and the workers faced tough conditions and earned minimum wages. Around 30–40% of the land was owned by the nobles, who were a privileged and wealthy class. They had extensive rights and controlled vast amounts of agricultural land, while the majority of the population, the peasants, worked on these estates under harsh conditions. The Russian Empire was characterized by a stark contrast between the wealthy and powerful elite and the impoverished and disadvantaged majority. Most peasants were not paid in the traditional sense. They lived in a system known as serfdom, which was similar to slavery in some respects. Serfs were tied to the land they worked on and were considered the property of the landowners, who were usually nobles or aristocrats. The serfs were obligated to work on the land and provide various forms of labor and produce to their landlords in exchange for protection and the right to live on the estate. They had limited freedom and were subject to the authority of the landowners. In 1861, during the reign of Tsar Alexander II, serfdom was officially abolished in Russia through the Emancipation Manifesto. However, the conditions of the peasants did not improve significantly after emancipation. While they were technically no longer bound to the land, they often remained trapped in a cycle of poverty and indebtedness to their former landlords. After the Bolsheviks seized control of Russia in 1917, Lenin and his party, after seeing immense destruction due to World War I, Russian Civil War and Russian famine of 1921, aimed to abolish the traditional social hierarchy and class distinctions, including the privileges of the old nobility, to create a classless society of equals. Lenin did not believe in radical transformation towards communism. He believed that socialism is gradual and socialist society evolves with time. He gave the new economic policy, which was a temporary economic policy proposed by Vladimir Lenin in 1921 for the Soviet Union. The NEP introduced a mixed economy, allowing private ownership of small and medium-sized businesses while the state retained control of large industries, banks, and foreign trade. The land reforms in the early years of the Soviet Union also included land nationalization, where all land was declared the property of the state. Private land ownership was abolished, and land became the collective property of the people, managed by the state. The new economic policy allowed for a mixed economy in Soviet Russia, with coexistence of private and public sectors. It represented a shift away from full nationalization of certain industries and welcomed foreign investments to fund industrial projects. Lenin aimed to achieve socialism gradually, using elements of capitalism and free trade. The NEP focused on agricultural policies, permitting private landholdings due to opposition to collectivization. Lenin replaced grain collection with a tax on peasants, encouraging increased production. The NEP aimed for a more independent economy, with labor reforms linking productivity to incentives and opening government positions to qualified workers. Lenin saw the new economic policy as a temporary retreat from socialism, considering it a form of state capitalism to evolve towards socialism. After its implementation, agricultural production significantly increased in Soviet Russia. Farmers were given the option to sell portions of their crops to the government, which incentivized them to produce more grain. However, the NEP also led to an economic imbalance as heavy industries remained state-owned while agriculture thrived. This led to a fall in agricultural prices and a rise in industrial prices. Many people think that there was no concept of money in USSR, but it's a myth. Only the prices of goods were determined by the state, and Soviet ruble was used for various transactions, wages, and trade within the country. Despite its success in economic recovery after World War I and the Civil War, the NEP faced opposition from the left within the Bolshevik Party. Lenin saw it as a temporary measure. Stalin initially supported the NEP but later criticized it for fostering capitalistic and reactionary thinking. Trotsky and Stalin disagreed on the Soviet economy's direction, with Trotsky favoring state control of all output for socialism, while Stalin advocated for a state-run capitalist approach. Stalin ultimately gained control of the Communist Party, leading to the abandonment of the NEP in 1928 and the implementation of the first five-year plan. The NEP was criticized for compromising socialist principles and creating a class of traitors viewed as enemies by the communists. The NEP was the same policy which Deng Xiaoping implemented in China during 1980s to create socialist market economy. The Soviet Union operated under a planned economy, where the government controlled almost all aspects of production, distribution, and pricing. Instead of market forces, central planners determined what goods and services should be produced and in what quantities. The Soviet government controlled prices and currency exchange. The state acted as both the employer and the market. It had complete right over pricing of every good and determining the salary and wages of all individuals. The government had the power to change prices to achieve economic goals. This centralized approach aimed to prioritize the development of heavy industries and military capabilities. Life in the USSR offered free education, healthcare, and access to basic services. The state heavily subsidized public transport, making it affordable for everyone. While the central planning system prioritized heavy industries and infrastructure, however, it often led to shortages of consumer goods and limited choices for the citizens. It means that USSR did offer all basic needs like food, housing, employment and education, but things like fancy cars, clothing, food products, and dishwashers were non-existent. The Soviet ruble functioned more like a voucher rather than a true currency like in a market economy. Citizens could use these rubles to buy limited goods from state shops, and prices were politically determined and not based on manufacturing costs. 1 ruble could get you various essential items at state-run shops, such as a loaf of bread, a few kilograms of potatoes, or a small amount of meat. However, the availability of goods was limited, and there were often long queues and shortages of consumer products. Certain essential items like bread and public transport were subsidized. There were special rubles used for accounting, not exchangeable for cash, and the export of rubles was illegal. In international trade, a non-convertible, clearing ruble, credit were used. It was illegal for Soviet citizens to own foreign currency. The Soviet Union was largely self-sufficient and engaged in limited trade, but in the 1970s, it increased trade with non-communist countries to fill gaps in domestic production. It exported fuels, metals, and timber, while importing consumer goods and sometimes grain. Trade with communist member states accounted for about half of its trade volume in the 1980s. The Soviet ruble was non-convertible from 1932 until the late 1980s, and buying or selling foreign currency on the black market was a serious crime. The banking system was centralized and controlled by the state-owned Gosbank, providing short-term credit to state-owned enterprises. In Soviet industry, most workers were paid on a piece rate system. Every worker was to be given a minimum wage for a certain output, and additional wages were given to those who exceeded their quotas. This system aimed to encourage workers to surpass their quotas and increase their earnings. While 1 ruble could buy you basic necessities in the Soviet Union, the centralized planned economy had its drawbacks. Scarcity of consumer goods and limited choices were common, but the state also provided essential services to its citizens. Tell me in comments that why communism failed despite the uplift it did after fall of Russian Empire.